Let us pray. Our Father, keep us mindful of the special and unique opportunity we have to work for our constituents and our province, and in that work give us strength and wisdom. Amen.
Introduction of visitors.
Speaker, there is a very special visitor in your gallery, and before I introduce her, I'd like to indicate to the Assembly that this morning I had the privilege of making a presentation to the honourable member from Stony Plain on behalf of the Alberta Safety Council. The presentation was an award called Saved by the Belt Club Award, presented to the honourable member for Stony Plain after he was involved in an accident that would have unlikely taken his life had he not been wearing a seatbelt. At the same time, I had the privilege of presenting a similar award to a niece of the honourable member for Stony Plain, Miss Lindsay Purdy, who was saved by a seatbelt in a tragic accident that killed both her grandparents a few months ago. Mr. Speaker, the niece, Lindsay Purdy, is seated in your gallery with her father, Don, and I'd ask them to rise and be recognized by the Assembly.
Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 205, the Seatbelt Act. Minister of Transportation has just made some very special remarks considering my use of a seatbelt and my niece's, Lindsay, the use of a seatbelt when my parents were killed in a motor vehicle accident some time ago. And I'm saying this in a testimonial way, Mr. Speaker, that I know from experience now that seatbelts work. And in this Assembly, over the number of years, I've introduced legislation, and we've had debates in this Assembly. We now have the Child Restraint Act in place, and I'm sure that day by day that the members of the Assembly are now coming to realize that it won't be very far off that we will have compulsory seatbelt legislation for all Albertans in this province. Thank you.
Having heard the motion by the honourable member for Stony Plain for first reading of Bill number 205, the Seatbelt Act, does the Assembly agree? Motion is carried. I note a tendency for the introductions of bills to become more and more, shall we say, challenging for debate and response, and perhaps we could abbreviate those introductions.
A bill being Seatbelt Act introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Purdy is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, leave to introduce Bill 209, the Alberta Palliative Care Act. Mr. Speaker, this foundation, in addition to its conventional responsibilities, will have 4 areas of primary focus. Firstly, to advance public awareness and understanding of palliative care. Secondly, to make grants to organizations that fund research into palliative care. Thirdly, to make grants to organizations that provide training for medical staff in the provision of palliative care. And fourthly, to assist volunteer organizations to obtain financial and professional assistance for programs that develop understanding and provision of palliative care.
The honourable member for Sherwood Park has moved that Bill number 209, the Alberta Palliative Care Foundation Act, be read a first time. Does the Assembly agree with the motion for first reading? The motion is carried.
A bill being Alberta Palliative Care Foundation Act introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Wu is now read a first time.
Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 208, the Disabled Parking Act. The purpose of this bill is to permit Alberta municipalities to ensure and enforce the reservation of parking spaces in public parking lots for vehicles operated by or transporting disabled persons.
The honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo has moved that Bill number 208, the Disabled Parking Act, be read a first time. Do you all agree? The motion is adopted.
A bill being Disabled Parking Act introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Lee is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 215, the Mortgage Interest Tax Deductibility Act. The purpose of this bill, Mr. Speaker, is to provide tax deductibility for mortgage interest paid on a principal residence up to a limit of $5,000.
The honourable leader of the Representative Party has moved that Bill number 215, the Mortgage Interest Tax Deductibility Act, be read a first time. Do you all agree? Motion is carried.
A bill being Mortgage Interest Tax Deductibility Act introduced by Honourable Mr. Speaker is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 212, the Council on the Status of Women Act. Mr. Speaker, the stressing of equality of Alberta women is this bill's primary goal, and this bill, if made law, would ensure a women's council with real teeth. A research and action-oriented council, as outlined in this bill, would have great latitude in its ability to deal head-on with the most pressing issues facing Alberta women today, without being tied to the arbitrary mandates from the minister or the government.
The honourable leader of the opposition has moved that Bill number 212, the Council on the Status of Women Act, be read a first time. Do you all agree? Motion is carried.
A bill being Council on the Status of Women Act introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Martin is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I request leave to introduce a bill being Bill number 211, an act to amend the Debtors Assistance Act. The purpose of this bill, Mr. Speaker, is not to forgive, but rather to reschedule a farmer's debts on a reasonable basis and thereby give them a better chance of success at no substantial cost to the Crown.
Having heard the motion by the honourable member for Spirit River Fairview for first reading of Bill number 211, an act to amend the Debtors Assistance Act. Do you all agree? Motion is carried.
A bill being an act to amend the Debtors Assistance Act introduced by Honourable Member Mr. Gurnett is now read a first time.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill 213, the Environment Conservation Act. The purpose of the bill is to reinstate the independence of the Environment Conservation Authority and to allow an impartial board to retrieve its authority to protect Alberta's environment without interference or influence from the minister.
Having heard the motion by the honourable member for Clover Bar for first reading of Bill number 213, the Environment Conservation Act, do you all agree? Motion is carried.
A bill being Environment Conservation Act introduced by Honourable Member Dr. Buck is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table the annual report of the Department of the Environment, the Surface Reclamation Fund, and file with the Assembly the annual review of the Alberta Environmental Centre.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to table the 1985 Progress Report of Farming for the Future and the 1984 and 1985 Annual Report of the Agricultural Development Corporation. Copies were forwarded to members on October 31st, 1985 and November 21st, 1985.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the annual report for 1984-85 of the Department of Labor, the same for the Alberta Human Rights Commission, and the same for the Pension Benefits Branch, and, Mr. Speaker, to file as required regulations under the Electrical Protection Act.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the 3 volumes of the public accounts of the Government of Alberta for the fiscal year 1984 and 1985, showing a budgetary surplus of $1.043 billion. As well, I will file copies of the financial summary and budgetary review.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the 1985 annual report for the Alberta Historical Resources Foundation.
Speaker, I'd like to table the final report of the Alberta Heritage Fund Small Business and Farm Interest Shielding Program and the annual report of the Alberta Motion Picture Development Corporation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table the annual report of Alberta Public Safety Services for the year ending March 31st, 1985, and the annual report for the same period of time for the Alberta Department of Transportation.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to table three reports: the annual report of the Alberta Recreation and Parks, the annual report for the Alberta Sports Council, and the annual report for the Recreation, Parks, and Wildlife Foundation.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to table the annual report for the Wild Rose Foundation for the fiscal period ended March 31st, 1985.
Introduction of special guests.
I thought there was going to be another tabling, and was waiting for that one. I'm tabling the annual report of the Legislature Library and the annual report of the Ombudsman.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce to the members of the Legislative Assembly 29 grade 6 students from Swan Hills. Despite a 3-hour bus ride, the students are energetic, enthusiastic, and well-disciplined and just filled with energy to be here today. I should point out to them that the lady who's 2 chairs to my right and dressed in green today and is the whip of the government caucus is a former resident of the town of Swan Hills, was one of the first nurses in that community not too many years ago. The students are accompanied by 3 teachers, Joyce Venables, Roger Manuel, and Terry Smith, and by parents Sandy Berglund, Bernadette Clark, Karine Lang, and Lorraine Olson, who also assisted as the bus driver. They're all seated in the members' gallery, and as I ask them to rise, I'd be pleased if my colleagues would accord them the traditional welcome.
Mr. Speaker, seated in your gallery today are 3 members of the Board of Directors of the Westerner Exposition Association in Red Deer. Mr. Glenn Good is the president of the Westerner. Mrs. Margie McPhee is the immediate past president of the Westerner Exposition, and Mr. Alvin Johnston is a former president of the Westerner Association. I would ask that they rise and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Speaker, I'm very pleased at this time to introduce to you and members of the Assembly 26 students from Laurier Heights School in the Edmonton-Glenora riding. They're from the bilingual class in grade 6. And, Monsieur le Président, permettez-moi à ce moment d'offrir un très bon accueil aux étudiants. They're accompanied by their teacher, Mademoiselle Christiane Durand. They're in the members' gallery, and I'd ask the Assembly to, in a bilingual fashion, welcome them to the Assembly today.
Mr. Speaker, this is another class act. And the real class is numbered among the 64 students from McKee Elementary School in Edmonton Park Allen. And it will take me long enough, Mr. Speaker, to recite the names of those accompanying them. I want them all to be of record, though. The classes are, in fact, 3 in number, all from grade 6, and in charge of Mr. Dan Green. Also with them, Mr. Ron Brewster and Mr. Al Beefus, the intern teacher, Miss Sandy Lyons, and student teacher, Miss Barbara Zinselmeyer, and student helper, Miss Robin Hodgkinson, and a substitute teacher, Mrs. Jean Bell. And I would ask, Mr. Speaker, that they rise now in the public gallery and that the members accord them a very enthusiastic welcome to the gallery.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to introduce to you and through you to members of this Assembly 15 students from the Legal Assistant Program at Career College in the constituency of Edmonton Centre. They are accompanied by their teacher, Dennis Roy, and their leader, Beverly Oliphant Hat. Mr. Speaker, I am told that these students are aspiring legal assistants with positively brilliant minds. I would ask that you please, they would rise and receive the warm welcome of this Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, somewhere in this House, I hope that I have 38 students from Greenview Elementary School in Calgary. They are accompanied by Mr. Pat Sproul and 5 adults. I would like them to rise and be recognized by the House if they are here.
Ministerial statements.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me a great deal of pleasure to announce an increase in the distribution of lottery funds received through the Western Canada Lottery Foundation. Various sports and cultural groups throughout the province have been receiving financial support through revenues from Alberta's participation in the Western Canada Lottery Corporation. I am pleased to announce today, Mr. Speaker, that the Government of Alberta will increase the funding provided to current recipients of lottery funds by approximately 25%. This increase will be effective for a 3-year period to expire March 31, 1989. A significant addition as well, Mr. Speaker, is new funding for 282 Class A, B, C, and D fares in the province, already existing as of April 1, 1986 throughout Alberta. This new funding will amount to $200,000 to Class A fares, with the exception of Edmonton and Calgary, $100,000 to Class B fares, $25,000 to Class C fares, $15,000 to Class D fares. Edmonton and Calgary will receive a larger increase in funding in view of their greater capital cost commitments. This additional funding to the various fares will again be for that 3-year period ending March 31st, 1989. I should highlight, Mr. Speaker, that this is a short-term adjustment to the lottery distribution method, and I plan over the weeks and months ahead to undertake a review of the distribution process. Mr. Speaker, in closing, I feel the substance of this announcement provides warranted support for the many volunteers, the fairs, and the associations throughout the province who provide a very valuable service to their communities. Mr. Speaker, I wish to file with the Legislative Assembly 2 copies of the list of recipients.
Oral question period.
Speaker, I'd like to direct the first question to the acting hospitals minister, and it has to do with Edmonton's main city hospital, the Royal Alexandra. And as the minister is well aware, the hospital is facing serious financial difficulty. My question is to the minister, will the acting hospitals minister indicate if the province is now reconsidering its refusal to fully support the hospital's redevelopment? And if so, when can we expect an announcement on this matter?
Mr. Speaker, the answer is no, but the acting hospitals minister will refer the question to the attention of the minister immediately upon his return.
Supplementary question to the acting hospitals minister, then. Is it the official policy of this government that Edmonton's primary city centre hospital will have to do without the high-tech equipment necessary for proper redevelopment?
Mr. Speaker, the answer, of course, is the same as the one given to the previous question.
Well, Mr. Speaker, then I will redirect the question then to the Premier in view of the fact that he's made some public comments. My question then is to the Premier. Is this a final statement by the government that there will be no money, some $28 million asked for by the Royal Alec, that they will not receive this money?
Mr. Speaker, as my honourable colleague, Minister of Labour, said, that this is a proper item for the Minister of Hospitals to deal with when he returns, and we will certainly have him do so. But I would say to the honourable member that no, that is not so, that it is the position of the government that when additional funding is proven to be needed, that funding is provided.
Well, supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. I would be directing it at the hospitals minister, but he hasn't been here for 2 days, so it's an issue that we wanted to take up. My question then from the Premier, which seems to be a little different than acting minister said, is this then. When can we expect an announcement about this $28 million?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I told the honourable member that it's necessary to determine whether it's needed. And there is quite a difference, and there always is, and it's something we live with in public life, and the difference between a wish or a want and a need. And as I said, if we determine that it is a need, then the funding is provided.
A wish, a want, and a need. Well, okay. It's, from that answer then to the Premier, is the Premier saying then from that statement that the Royal Alex staff is incorrect and are actually exaggerating what's going on at the hospital?
No, I don't think that was in any way, Mr. Speaker, in my reply. I must say that the Royal Alex staff and their board alerted us that they were going to be taking a public position on this matter, would be using the media and the opposition and the legislature and I guess the election to press their point. And I think, Mr. Speaker, that's certainly acceptable, but it comes back to the original principle that I stated, and that is we will try and determine the difference between a wish or want and a need. And if it is a need, then it will be provided.
Well, a wish, a want, and a need. Let me present this question to either one of the honourable gentlemen. Would either the Premier or the acting minister indicate the policy considerations which have led other Alberta hospitals to be able to get the proper funding to operate at full capacity while the Royal Alex has been blocked from the same? Because this just didn't happen. They said they've been trying to get this funding for 3 years.
Mr. Speaker, these are details that the Minister of Hospitals should deal with. I should point out to the Honourable Leader of the Opposition that in Edmonton there's some $860 million of hospital construction committed or underway or being completed. $860 million in this city. That is more hospital construction than in any other province, not just a city, in any other province. It's a tremendous contribution to hospital development in this city. However, the principle still stands. If it is proven that more is needed, then more will be provided.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Does the government then, or the acting hospital minister, either gentleman, do they have any studies about the Royal Alex situation? And, as has been stated by people over there, that it's possible that people have died because they weren't able to get the proper care. Does the government have any studies on this matter? That might determine whether it's a wish, a want, or a need for the government.
Well, yes, Mr. Speaker, and that is the type of thing that guides the government in making the determinations and the funding allocations.
Supplementary question then to the Premier, if I may try to determine here in an area between a wish, a want, and a need and help the government out, Mr. Speaker. Would the government be prepared to end extra billing and user fees and retrieve $22 million from the federal government? That would go a long way in helping out the Royal Alex.
It's an interesting proposal, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the doctors who are speaking for the Royal Alex would suggest that as well.
Mr. Speaker, I'm speaking for ordinary Albertans and ordinary Edmontonians, not the doctors. My question is then to the Premier. Is this one of the options that they would look at? Never mind who the doctors are and all the rest of it. Is this one of the options that the government will look at?
Mr. Speaker, it's not an option we're considering right now.
Supplementary question. Would one of the options considered by the government be the changing of the priority that has been established with regards to the Children's Hospital in Edmonton?
No, Mr. Speaker, it's not, because we consider that an absolute priority. But I would say, Mr. Speaker, one of the things the honourable members might consider is with $860 million of hospital development, it may well take pressure off some of the demands on the Royal Alec. I'd like to say at this time that I consider it one of the finest hospitals in this country, and the board and the medical staff are a tremendous contribution, make a tremendous contribution to this city. But there is sometimes a difference of opinions. We're not closing our mind. The Edmonton MLAs, the Minister of Hospitals, will consider it, as I said earlier, to see if the need is there.
Speaker, I'd like to direct the second question in the absence of the Minister of Energy to the acting Minister of Energy. And Mr. Speaker, I'd like to file 3 copies of a memo I have that comes from the Associate Deputy Minister to the Petroleum Marketing Commission. We'll ask the page to provide a copy also to the Minister. Now, Mr. Speaker, the memo concerns a dispute between Esso Resources and the Crown on a royalty debt. And the last paragraph says, it's a quick one, I would quote, "We would like to orchestrate things such that your settlement and our gas deal are divorced from one another from a documented perspective. That is, that one is not contingent upon the other in anyone's eyes other than the insiders." My question is to the government. Is it the policy of this government to orchestrate under the table deals with large oil companies to hide the writing off of royalty obligations?
Oh, that's not it. I'm waiting for the mysterious memo. There's one a day, I imagine. Mr. Speaker, it's come my way. I, of course, am just now seeing the memo for the first time, and the Minister of Energy is presently in Ottawa, involved in some very important discussions on behalf of the energy producers of this province, and we all wish him well in that respect. He'll be back tomorrow and be able to respond. Of course, in terms of our government, all our dealings are on the up and up and first class.
Mr. Speaker, that's certainly a debatable point, but while the Minister is checking on that so we can get a report on that, will he also have the Minister check on whether a special deal has been arranged with Esso, which has not been offered to other in situ operators on non-payment of royalties at Cold Lake for gas produced there, which is used for fuel?
Speaker, I'll take that question as notice, and the Energy Minister will be able to respond when he returns.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. This one perhaps could be answered because the memo says that Esso has some sort of, and it's quoted in their cabinet-blessed document, which releases them from a debt of $19 million. Will the Minister, could the Minister update us on what that cabinet-blessed document, or if he cannot here today, will he also have the Minister report back on that?
I'm sure that the Minister of Energy will be able to respond to that as well when he returns.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. The memo also says, I don't believe the Minister would allow any litigation. Now, perhaps to the Premier, may we have a policy statement from this government on pursuing debts of some $19 million, in this case, or more by litigation? That is this a special arrangement for Esso, or is it across-the-board policy that royalty debts are not pursued?
Certainly, Mr. Speaker, it is not the policy of the government that legitimate debts are not pursued.
Question, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier then. I would ask him this. Can the Premier outline what the policy of this government is then when bureaucrats orchestrate settlements that are for insiders' eyes only? My question specifically, do these require ministerial approval?
Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Leader of the Opposition has raised some questions regarding a memo that he has had, raised them in bits and pieces, which would have been interesting to have them all at once so they could have the same reply that's necessary. And we are going to look into it, as the Honourable Member said, and we'll give him a reply in detail.
Supplementary question to the Premier. Before I raised these questions today, was the Premier informed in any way about this royalty write-off?
Mr. Speaker, without looking into the memorandum and the details behind it, I couldn't reply to that except to take notice of his question and reply to him later.
One final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Recognizing that we do have this memo and the Premier is now aware of it, would the Premier now undertake to make sure that this $19 million is given back to the Alberta taxpayers where it belongs?
Mr. Speaker, the same principle applies as I stated earlier. All legitimate debts will be pursued in order that we might receive payment on them.
Don't want to delay the Honourable Leader of the Representative Party. I should say that I had some misgiving about this procedure. It seems to me that if a line of questions is going to be based on a document, that it should be put on the order paper and the document produced or referred to, so that we don't take up the time of the question period with people wondering about something they've never heard of.
Mr. Speaker, just on a point of order, as we know, the Energy Minister hasn't been here for a couple of days. I could put it on an order paper, but it may never come back. That's the reality. If we want to deal with a serious issue, and we think this is a serious one, then often this is the only time that we have to do it, and to have any assurances that we'll get any answers.
Mr. Speaker, maybe it's orchestrated.
Mr. Speaker, if I could proceed with my question, keep the band playing here for the farmers of Alberta. Yesterday in question period, the Minister of Agriculture indicated that up to 5% of the farmers in Alberta may not obtain operating funds from the banks, the lending agencies. That's some 2,800 farmers in the province of Alberta. Could the Minister indicate whether and assure this House that the program called the New Farm Development Guarantee Program will make funds available, operating funds available, to most of those people that may go without funds this spring?
Mr. Speaker, my answer to the question yesterday said in my discussion with the banks that they had suggested it was a very small percentage, certainly under 5%. There can be no guarantees that people are going to get money. We provide the guarantee we streamline the guarantee so the banks can make those decisions and provide those guarantees. In addition to that, we have the Alberta Farm Development Guarantee, plus we have specific guarantees. And to ensure that as many producers as possible can receive the assistance they need this spring, we have moved over the course of the last year to put into place enterprise counselors and whatever assistance that would be needed to try and help farmers to develop a workout plan to be able to take to their bank so that they would be able to get operating credit. Mr. Speaker, we provide the opportunity, but we can't provide the guarantee.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister of Agriculture, and it's relative to a guarantee. Some of the talks that I have had with local bankers have indicated to me that there is a clause in the guarantee program which can cancel the guarantee if for some reason the farmer is unable to make his or her payments. And I was wondering if the Minister is aware of that, and would there be any consideration of reviewing and possibly changing that clause?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm certainly not aware of that clause, but I'll certainly look into it and report back.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. The interest rate on the farm development guarantee program would be prime plus 1. Has the minister had considered possibly changing that interest rate?
Mr. Speaker, when we were looking at modifying the program so that it would become accessible to more farmers, of course, we looked at that option. Most farmers and businesses, when they're getting operating money, get it at prime plus 1. If we would have had the rate significantly lower, then everyone, of course, would have been under that guarantee program, and the normal bank operations would have been interfered with. So we did look at it, but we felt it was reasonable being at the bank prime interest rate plus 1%, considering that interest rates are coming down somewhat, and it is realistic looking at operating credit. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, I should say that the level of comfort would be there for the consolidation of existing agricultural debt and under our new $2 billion loan program.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the minister. The minister talks about the comfort program, the Farm Credit Stability Program, as being one that will assist in terms of operating monies. Could the minister indicate confirm whether operating funds are available through that program or not? Are machinery debts applicable to that program as well?
Mr. Speaker, we're still working on developing some of the further details to the program, but certainly new operating credit would not be covered under the program, but present agricultural debt, which of course would likely include some operating credit, could be. So in answer to the question clearly, the consolidation or reorganization or restructuring of agricultural debt under the new program is certainly there, but it wouldn't be for new operating credit.
I hesitate to interrupt the honourable leader, but we're having difficulty again with the sound system. It's now over 10 years old. We've tried to be frugal about it, but I think perhaps we've stretched it beyond its limits, and there's nothing we can do about it during the present session. So I would respectfully ask honourable members if they might speak less softly. I know I'm one of the culprits, but I'll try to remember, and I'll try to imagine the member in the far corner there as being hard of hearing. So perhaps members could just turn up the volume a little bit, because not only other members, but also our guests in the gallery are having difficulty hearing what is being said on the floor.
Mr. Speaker, just as a point of interest, when I came into this legislature, it was the first time that microphones were introduced into our assembly. Prior to that time, we had a conservative member on this side of the House, prior to 1963, and he made multiple speeches, and no one ever heard them for this legislature.
They were lucky. That was
the budget was struck to. Right. A budget was struck to put in the speaker system, and I guess we heard them too well. Maybe that's the other side of the story. My supplementary question to the Minister of Agriculture, in considering the 9% interest rate on the Farm Credit Stability Program, what considerations were made in terms of a 5 or 6% interest rate, and why was that? Why were those two interest rates rejected in the government's consideration?
Mr. Speaker, the provincial treasurer may wish to supplement my answer, but of course we looked at what would be the most reasonable rate of interest considering what we were trying to achieve, and that was stability. If you look over the last 10-year period, our interest rate of 9% would have been a very reasonable rate of interest, and one that would have been an interest rate that would have certainly helped producers over the course of a number of years. Looking at, we also didn't want the program to be inflationary. We're looking at stabilizing the interest rate and being at a reasonable level. So that's the consideration that was given, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, a supplementary question to the Minister of Agriculture. Two of our organizations in the province of Alberta, the Cow-Calf Association and Unifarm, have put forward proposals relative to acreage payments and as well retroactive interest shielding. And their concern is certainly the availability of operating capital for the farmers this spring. Could the minister indicate the government's position on those two matters at the present time, and is there any consideration being given to policy such as that being announced during this session or this spring?
Mr. Speaker, we seriously looked at the acreage payment proposal and made the decision no, that wouldn't be a viable option. It would mean the drawing of lines and the different dollar numbers flowing to individuals across this province. The federal government has taken that approach. We didn't feel it was the most reasonable approach. And in place of it, we made the decision to double the farm fuel rebate to 63.6 cents a gallon, recognizing that a number of farmers, grain farmers, are the larger users of fuel, and we did that in the place of an acreage payment. In addition to that, around $800 million in programs that we've announced were put in there to help increase the cash flow of our producers and thereby enhance their cash flow and enable them to get operating credit. So, Mr. Speaker, in answer to the question, we're not looking at any development of any acreage payment program at this time. We will continue to monitor the situation and will always, as we always have in the past, always respond when it's most appropriate.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary to the minister. Could the minister indicate or clarify in terms of the possible 2,800 farmers that may not get operating funds this spring, that is a realistic figure, or has the government some other figure in mind that they're looking at to determine the present policy?
Mr. Speaker, I don't have access to the books of all of the farmers in this province, so I can only go by information that is given me. And the bankers that I've discussed it with said that there would be 1% to 1.5% that would have difficulty, and I said, well, what is normal? Is that normal? And they said, usually that is fairly close to being normal. Mr. Speaker, I can only work from the best information that I'm given.
Speaker, supplementary question and a final supplementary to the minister. Could the minister indicate the policy, the general policy on government, of the government of Alberta in retaining the present number of farmers on the farm in Alberta? Is there a loss rate that is acceptable to government, or is there a loss rate unacceptable?
Mr. Speaker, we don't, not going to get into the numbers game of what's appropriate and what isn't. That's up to the individual private sector farmers to make that decision. We will provide the opportunity for them to be in agriculture, and that's what we will continue to do. To even suggest in any way that we aren't doing all that we can and what our policy is ridiculous, because what our intention is, and it should be clear to anyone, that we must provide a safety net for producers, and we're working on that with the overhaul of the Crop Insurance Corporation and their proposals, and we're looking at making proposals to the federal government on the changes to the Western Grain Stabilization Act and a number of other factors to try and provide the safety net, and also in the credit area to try and be of every assistance we can in providing reasonable capital at a stable interest rate for our farmers, and then that will give them the opportunity to be involved in agriculture. But, Mr. Speaker, I will not get involved anyway in suggesting that government should pick the winners and losers.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the minister. In view of the minister's statements here in the last few days and also the action of the House yesterday that indicates clearly that per acre payments and parity pricing are rejected, and yet in view of the minister's statement now that perhaps they have to continue to look at other things, could the minister indicate what other ideas he might still have in the wings that may be of some assistance if there is, as most producers are saying, a need for more cash on hand?
Mr. Speaker, there's nothing that would take the place of a worldwide increase in our commodity prices. That would be the best thing that we can do. We will, of course, in the future, as we have in the past, take every appropriate action to try and be of every assistance and be partners with farmers in this province to see that the agriculture in this sector remains strong, and not only remains strong, but continues to build and to grow.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister. The issue of the rate of the interest under the new credit program, I'm wondering if one factor, if the Minister could tell us if a factor in determining the rate of interest was the rate at which the province will be able to borrow the money that will be put into that program on the world market.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for Spirit River Fairview because I neglected to say that, and that certainly is true. What we were attempting to do in that program was take the strength of our AAA credit rating in Alberta, the strength of the financial position of this province, and share it with the farmer so that we could pass on to the farmer the rate that our good credit rating. And, Mr. Speaker, that was the deciding point in choosing the 9% interest rate as being the most realistic one that we could expect in using the borrowing power of the province.
Supplementary question then, Mr. Speaker. Could the Minister just confirm then that the province expects to borrow the money at the same rate of interest that will be passed on to farmers?
Mr. Speaker, I refer that question to the Provincial Treasurer.
Of course, not necessarily, Mr. Speaker. We would attempt to secure funds at the lowest efficient rate for the province, and those rates vary by the day, as the honourable member knows. Of course, there will be administration fees to pay and would be other expenses which the government would incur, but we would endeavour to secure the funds at the lowest possible rate, bearing in mind the fact that this program is a stability program for 20 years and that is a very attractive rate of 9%.
The honourable member for Lac-La-Biche McMurray, followed by the honourable member for Clover Bar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the speech from the throne indicated support of major energy projects in the Alberta tar sands. Would the Honourable Premier advise the Assembly of further expansion of the Syncrude project as part of the discussions taking place in Ottawa by the Honourable Ministers of Energy?
Yes, Mr. Speaker. I would admit, well, I'm certain that the Husky upgrader, the general health of the energy industry in Alberta and Canada, and the potential expansion of the Syncrude plant would all be items that would be discussed at that meeting.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, would the Honourable Premier have any details or to report to the Assembly at this time?
I don't have any details to report at this time. I would expect we will hear from the Honourable Minister of Energy perhaps later today and certainly probably tomorrow in the legislature when he returns. But I would say this to the Honourable Member with regards to the Syncrude expansion. This government considers that expansion is such an important part, and development of the oil sands, an important part of our province and indeed of Canada, and the upgrader as well. That, and we feel very strongly that these projects deserve the support of our federal government. And we think that on a common sense basis we should get it, and with the support of our Alberta MPs, I think we should get it. But if we don't, that the government of Alberta will do everything possible to keep both the expansion moving and the upgrader moving.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. I wish the Premier would clarify that. Does the Alberta government then have contingency plans in place if federal assistance is not there?
Mr. Speaker, I wouldn't want to completely divulge any matters that are properly used in negotiations with the federal government. But I will say this, that those projects are important to this province and to our country, and particularly because they have such a long lead time. Therefore, we will, with or without help, maintain the pace of those projects through the engineering and planning development stage.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. To the Premier, does the Premier not consider it a tactical error to make that sort of statement when you're in negotiations with the federal party? They may just say, let them do it alone, we get the benefits.
I've heard that argument before, Mr. Speaker, but I must say I think common sense prevails, and that these projects are tremendously important to our province and to our country. And I assume that with the support of the Alberta members of Parliament, strong position of our government, and, Mr. Speaker, the position of the federal government, that they will want to maintain these projects.
Question, Mr. Speaker. Common sense may prevail. They can get all those benefits if we're paying for it. My question is to the minister for making statements about going it alone. How would this be paid for without a long-term floor price? How are we going to get the private sector involved?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I guess I just have more confidence in the province and in these resources than the Honourable Leader of the Opposition. Also, Mr. Speaker, I think the Honourable Leader of the Opposition knows that it isn't the price of oil today that determines the viability of those projects, but rather the price of oil when those projects come on stream.
Supplementary question to the Premier. Confidence doesn't pay the bills. And my question is very specifically recognizing that there's a 5 to 7 year lead time. But if the private sector was so confident about that, it seems to me that they would be involved in it now without government help. My question is, what terms of help are we prepared to give? How much are we prepared to give out of the trust fund? I think that's what Albertans want to know at this time before we go into an election.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I've made the position clear, and that is that the government is determined to keep those projects moving along their 5-year, 7-year path. I don't expect that it would be giving anything or spending anything. I think it would be an investment in the future of this province.
The Honourable Member for Clover Bar, followed by the Honourable Leader of the Representative Party.
Mr. Speaker, my question is the Honourable Minister of Advanced Education, and this has to do with the current crowding and overcrowding in the University of Calgary. Can the Minister indicate what long-range plans the Government of Alberta has to alleviate the crowding in the University of Calgary?
Mr. Speaker, it's interesting to discover the newfound information from the member from Clover Bar. In fact, if there was ever any overcrowding in the University of Calgary, it was probably taking place 3 years ago, when in fact the population at that institution reached its maximum. I'd like to inform the member that since then the population of the university is in fact decreasing from that peak. And of course, with the massive capital investment program which the province now has in place through the variety of colleagues, including the Parks and Recreation Minister responsible for Olympics, that in fact we are attempting in a variety of ways to cope with the student numbers at the University of Calgary. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, I know the member would want to learn of the new program which the province of Alberta introduced, which provides for additional assistance to the universities and colleges to accommodate enrollment increases, which is term money, I agree, but which in fact is in response to the demand by students for more accommodation, more spaces, and by the university to cope with that problem. And finally, Mr. Speaker, no rounded policy would be complete unless I did deal with the question of students themselves. And as you well know, Mr. Speaker, this government has given to 50,000 university students and college students in this province some $116 million to allow them to complete their education. To me, Mr. Speaker, that's a program for you.
Maybe the people in Lethbridge will believe that, but the University of Calgary students won't. Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, Minister, using the advanced education guidelines for the University of Calgary, where there's a shortage of 15,400 gross square meters of space. This is including the new facilities that the Minister is talking about. There's still going to be a 22% shortage using their own guidelines. If the Minister's so brilliant, Mr. Speaker, maybe he can indicate to the Assembly why the University of Calgary's funding has gone down when their enrollment is increased. Can the Minister indicate what he's going to do about that?
Well, once again, Mr. Speaker, the member is trapped in his own research. First of all, I should say that one of the reasons my colleague, the Minister of Hospitals, has been away is that he's been participating in a very exciting event at the University of Calgary, that is the opening of Scurfield Hall, wherein the combination of the private sector donations from the Scurfield family coupled with our endowment fund, the only one in Canada, has allowed that university to bring on stream a substantial amount of space for the business faculty, which in fact has been overcrowded, but now, of course, is reaching a very comparable level of square foot to student ratio. But as well, Mr. Speaker, and as usual, a member from Clover Bar is in fact imprecise in his analysis. If you take a careful look at the funding of the University of Calgary, in any comparison at all, you will find that it is in fact one of the highest funded universities in Canada, as are all institutions in this province, and I will dare the minister to measure the province of Alberta against any other province in Canada on any measurement with respect to per student population measurements of funding or per capita funding. And you must, of course, factor in the capital I referred to. On all bases, Mr. Speaker, Canada is proud of Alberta's record in the funding of universities and colleges, as am I.
I'm certainly glad I'm going half-deaf because I only had to listen to half of that garbage.
Order, please.
Mr. Speaker, that's what it was garbage, because that's what he was.
Please.
Speaker, to the minister, and Mr. Speaker, to the minister, using the minister's department's own figures, if we were going to use the guidelines as established by the minister's department, there should have been 3,400 fewer students at the University of Calgary using their own guidelines. Is the minister going to indicate, if these figures were followed, that we would be excluding people who are qualified to go to the University of Calgary if we were using these space guidelines, because there is a shortage?
I know the member from Clover Bar does not like to be beaten in Debate, Mr. Speaker, and of course he always wants to pick on this issue because, of course, he is faulty in his analysis. Hey, I was tolerant with you, Mr. Speaker, with the member from Clover Bar, and if he doesn't want to hear the facts, then skip over to another question where he can get the same kind of response, because he never does his work, as you well know. Let me say, Mr. Speaker, that in terms of the analysis,
on a point of order, Mr. Speaker, on a point of order, that was an unacceptable remark. Every member comes to this legislature to do their job and do their work, and the judgment is left at the time of the election. And I think that's unfair of the honourable member to make a comment such as that. And if we want to go to the election and make the judgment, my friend will prove to the honourable minister that thinks he has so much wisdom that he can gain majority support in a major way in his constituency and come back here and give some good advice to the minister, which we hope may be absent.
Perhaps we could conclude this exchange now and get back to the question period in the short time that's available. I didn't intervene. I realized that there were some things that were out of order on both sides. The honourable member first challenged the minister to be brilliant, and I had to give him a little scope then, and then the honourable member referred to an answer as garbage, and of course I did object to that. The honourable minister somewhat added to my objection, but perhaps we could let it go at that. I don't think we need a long post-mortem about it either. The honourable member for the I wonder if this could be brief. I overlooked the honourable member for Spirit River Fairview, and he would like to ask a question before the time runs.
My question to the Minister of Agriculture is with regards to the sugar beet industry of southern Alberta. In the 1985 spring session, the minister indicated and made available through the government $6 million to the industry to assure an attempt to assure that the industry would be in place in 1985. Current negotiations are going on, and I was wondering if the minister could indicate whether that $6 million is still available to the industry in southern Alberta for various reasons.
Mr. Speaker, it was available up to the end of the fiscal year, and then, of course, it expired with the end of the year. It's my understanding that the negotiations are going fairly well, and the federal government said that they will be partners this year with the growers, and then they will be negotiating for next year for a tripartite type of a stabilization approach. So, Mr. Speaker, no, the dollars that were there were certainly there for the entire year last year, but there's no plans now to repeat that.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate whether the Government of Alberta has accepted to be in being a partner in that tripart agreement at the time negotiation will proceed? Has the principle been accepted by the Alberta Government at this time, and that all that is left is the details of agreement to be put together?
No, Mr. Speaker, I don't think that's accurate. I said I would fully cooperate in the discussions working towards a tripartite agreement. There's a little difference in working with the sugar beet industry than there is with the livestock sector across the country, and I'm not sure of what the proper approach would be. But I did make it very clear to the federal government that I would fully cooperate in those discussions and working towards a stabilization agreement for sugar beet growers.
The honourable member for Spirit River Fairview.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to direct a question pursuing some of the things we talked about earlier to either the Minister of Agriculture or the Provincial Treasurer. The question is, could we be told, please, if there's been a rate for initial financing secured at this point, or what is the initial rate that's expected for borrowing to put money into the Credit Stability Program?
Well, Mr. Speaker, no, that hasn't been done yet, of course, and would not until the funds are ready to flow. But certainly we will be looking at securing the rate at the lowest possible cost for the people of Alberta.
Supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Certainly, given the nearness of the program, the process must be underway, and I wonder if the Treasurer could indicate what the expectation would be within a fraction of a point or so of a rate that they are going to secure money at.
It's not possible to do that with precision, Mr. Speaker, because as the honourable member knows, the cost of money around the world varies virtually every hour. So we will continue our efforts in securing those funds at the lowest possible rate. And I can assure the honourable member the monies will be available for this dramatic new program when the wickets open for the farmer.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker, again to the Treasurer. Could the Treasurer indicate whether any savings, if funds are secured significantly below 9%, will be passed on through modifications in the program?
Well, of course, Mr. Speaker, it won't be known for some considerable time as to the exact cost of the program, because in addition to such items as costs of administration, there would have to be borne the costs of defaults. Hopefully those would be very few, but there would be some, and those would be down the road. And as well the difference in which there may be between the cost of the money borrowed and the money loaned. So it would not be possible for some time to estimate the exact cost of that, but I did give an indication yesterday as to the expected annual cost of the program.
Supplementary question, Mr. Speaker. Could the Treasurer indicate if there's any limit on rates that would affect the security of the program?
I'm not sure what the honourable member is driving at, Mr. Speaker.
Are there any rates that are in mind that would put a limit on the program's ability to function? Any increased rates that beyond a certain point the program would not be functional?
To that, it can be very clear to all farmers in this province that the program will be there late spring, and the effective rate is going to be 9%, and that will be fixed, and it'll be fixed for the 20-year term. That's fact, no matter what the provincial treasurer and how he works it out. I want the farmers of this province to rest assured that that will be the program.
Supplementary question.
Might this be the final supplementary? We're running out of time.
Yes. To the Minister of Agriculture, then, the question is, if there is the availability of money at significantly below 9%, would the Minister be undertaking to have the program modified to pass that savings on to farmers just as vigorously?
Mr. Speaker, I've always tried to get the lowest possible interest rate for farmers that we can, and you can be sure that I will do all that I can to be helpful in that way.
The time for the question period has run out. Orders of the day, and might we revert briefly to introduction of special guests?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a real pleasure for me to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly 15 grade 12 students from the Riley School in the constituency. They are accompanied by their teacher, Mr. Boglin, bus driver, Mr. Knudsen. They are seated in the members' gallery, and I would ask that they rise and receive the welcome of the Assembly.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure to